So Sean, ready when you are. Wait lang, sir. Sean.
Okay.
Okay. Good luck.
Hey, hold on.
Max.
Good
Sabi ka lang.
afternoon.
Or take two.
Take two. 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are Group 1, and we will be talking about non-vascular plants. Reminders before we formally start the presentation. Please turn off your mics unless recognized. And please save all your questions at the end of the presentation. And lastly, take important notes and listen carefully to each of the speakers later. Without further ado, let us begin. First off, there are 3 types of plant groups: vascular plants, non-vascular plants, and spermatophytes. But the first to evolve were the non-vascular plants, or otherwise known as bryophytes. Hence why it's also called as the lower plants. These bryophytes do not have vascular tissues that transport water and nutrients to the rest of the plants. This is also why they lack through leaves, roots, and stems. They do not have flowers, fruits, or seeds, as their 2 main forms of reproduction are through spores during their asexual sporophyte stage and through sperms and eggs through their sexual gametophyte phase. As they do not have vascular systems, they transfer nutrients mainly through osmosis, diffusion, and cytoplasmic streaming. They form groups and would often look like green mats in moist habitats such as wetlands and marshes. Their general structure is composed of parenchyma cells, rhizoids, which act like the roots to keep the plant upright, and the thallus, that is the main body of the plant, where the reproductive organs are located.
So it is also important to consider that although they are different from one another morphologically, they share a common life cycle with mosses. So start off. So the germinating spores produce the so-called protonema. So the protonema is responsible for pushing the efficient mineral and water absorption due to its wide surface area. And because of the abundant nutrients around the environment, it urges the protonema to develop buds with tissue-producing meristem. So for more background info, the meristem is a type of tissue found in plants. It consists of undifferentiated cells called as the meristematic cells, which is capable of cell division. Cells in the meristem can develop into all the other tissues and organs that occur in plants. And then these buds will generate these gametophytes, which will attach to the substrate via the rhizoid. So gametophytes are responsible for the production of gametes. And once these gametophytes mature, they have this specialized organ, which is called as the gametangia, where both the male and female gametes are produced. And once both gametes become mature, the sperm cells from the antheridium will now swim towards the archegonium, where the egg cell is located. Again, sperm cell is located in the antheridium, while archegonium is located in the non-motile egg. The non-motile egg is located in the archegonium. And in order for the sperm cell to know the location of the egg cells, the archegonium secretes sucrose in order for the sperm cell to be guided. And once the sperm cell encounters the egg cell, it will now fuse with one another, and now they will be fertilized. And moving on, the developing zygote remains in the archegonium, and it is nourished through matotrophy or maternal nourishment. Take note that sugar and amino acids are an important part in this process. Also, a series of mitotic divisions generate a multicellular embryo which grows into a mature sporophyte. Again, if gametophytes are for producing gametes, sporophyte on the other hand is for producing spores. And nutrient transport is facilitated by the placenta. Take note that the placenta is located between the food and the gametophyte. So this is the reason why the bryophyte sporophyte is never independent and is relatively smaller compared to the gametophyte. And as the embryo matures, parts of the sporophyte specializes into the calyptra, capsules, or otherwise known as a sporangium, and seta, which is otherwise known as a stalk. So one capsule is able to generate over 50 million haploid spores via meiosis. And then, An operculum located in the apex or on the top of the capsule breaks off to expose a perisome teeth, which opens once these conditions are fulfilled. First, the air is dry. Second, the spores are light, non-sticky, and are ready for wind dispersal. And in order for the spores to not get damaged easily, they have these sporopollenin walls in order to ensure the spores safe travel. And when the spores landed on the substrate or the soil, it will now grow and the cycle will now repeat itself. And it is also important to consider that some bryophytes undergo asexual reproduction through fragmentation and the formation of gemmae. So this process is being followed by the phylum Mercantrophyta, which will be further discussed later. Sean?
In continuation, since bryophytes live in moist habitats, they are the ideal model organisms for observation in study cases such as air pollution and climate change. During the early diversification of bryophytes, three monophyletic lineages emerged: the phylum Bryophyta, the phylum Marcontiophyta, and phylum Anthrocerophyta. Starting off, the phylum Bryophyta. Fiona, you may now take the online stage.
Thank you for that, Sean. Now, let us dig deeper into the first phylum to be discussed today, the phylum Bryophyta. These are collectively known as mosses. In this phylum, the leafy stems of the moss called gametophores are tightly pressed together to form a mound. To further expound, gametophores are the prominent structures in seedless plants composed of reproductive structures and photosynthetic tissues. Moving on, in other members, especially those residing in wet habitats, the stems are more loosely packed. And although all mosses have leaves, we should keep in mind that these are not homologous to the leaves found in vascular plants. Several mosses and hornworts have stomata in their sporangia, wherein the stomata generally function in the regulation of gas exchange and water uptake. The aerial sporophyte axis, on the other hand, is thought to be the predecessor to the sporophytic stem of vascular plants. Moss leaves have cuticles only on their upper surface because the lack of cuticles on their underside allows direct water absorption. Mosses also have autapomorphies or distinctive features, and these are the following. First is the presence of conductive cells called hydroids for water conduction and leptoids for sugar conduction in some. I repeat, hydroids for water conduction and leptoids for sugar conduction. Next is the thick spore outer layer called the perine layer that functions as protection to avoid desiccation, which is also known as the lack of moisture from a living organism. And last but not the least, mosses have leaves with a central midrib costa that resembles a vein. May we remind everyone to please listen extra carefully to this part of the presentation. The phylum Bryophyta consists of 6 classes, namely Tachachiopsida, a genus of 2 moss species known from Western North America and Central and Eastern Asia. Next is the Sphagnopsida, also known as the peat moss, since it grows in acidic marshes and helps in peat formation. Peat moss pala is sphagnum that has been decayed or dried. Next is the Andreopsida, also known as lantern mosses. These are commonly found growing on exposed rock surfaces. Next, the Andreobryopsida, also known as lantern mosses, same as the one mentioned above. The only difference is that in this class, the species are dioecious, which means that the male and female reproductive organs are born on a separate gametophyte. They possess a seta wherein the pseudopodium is absent. The pseudopodium's function is locomotion and feeding by protozoans. Next is the Polytrichopsida. It is a common family of mosses wherein its members tend to be larger than other mosses since they have a thickened central stem and a rhizome. And lastly is the Bryopsida, also known as joint-toothed or orthodontous. This class displays a very diverse assortment of species, which is also why it is considered the largest class of mosses, amounting to 95% of all moss species. That wraps up the phylum Bryophyta. Let us now proceed to the next phylum.
For the second phylum, we have the phylum Mercantiophyta, which is commonly known as liverworts. This was a reference to the lobed appearance that looks like a liver. It harkens back to a time when people believed that God put a signature to indicate what they were meant to heal. And since it looked like a diminutive liver, they believed that it was meant to cure sick livers. There are also generally small green plants that contain elaters and have oil bodies that are distinct to liverworts. There are over 10,000 species and can be found in moist habitats, particularly in the tropics, and are distributed throughout the world. The tundra environment has adapted successfully to liverworts. They, like all other tundra plants, are highly adapted to withstand strong winds and soil disturbances.
They largely rely on diffusion to transport water and nutrients. Their leaves are void of vascular tissue, extensively split to seam two-lobed, and placed in two rows along a heavily branching stem. Unlike real mosses, which are usually erect, leafy liverworts grow in compact, flat mats.
Though they appear leafy, the majority of liverworts do not have true leaves or stems. Rather, they are thalloid, and are therefore characterized by a thallus, a leaf-like vegetative tissue, and root-like filamentous known as rhizoids. The thallus part of the plant contains photosynthetic tissue, while the rhizoid attaches the plant to the substrate. Liverworts are also used as a medicinal plant in the Philippines to heal boils and abscesses.
Phylum Mercantiophyta is capable of sexual and asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction occurs when the gemme falls on the ground and germinates to give rise to a new individual. Gemme are contained in goblet-like structures on the thallus. In the event of strong wind or rain, the bud tissue is knocked out of the cup and falls to the ground, where it germinates under favorable conditions.
In sexual reproduction, liverwort gametes are contained in miniature umbrella-like structures that grow from the thallus. During sexual reproduction, male gametes are released from the male structure and swim along the surface of the plant in order to fertilize the female eggs. Following fertilization, the embryo develops into a capsule with spores. The spores give rise to new individuals when they land on a suitable surface following dispersal.
Phylum Mercantiophyta has two classes, Mercantiopsida and Juggermaniopsida. All the complex thallus liverworts are in the former, and all the leafy liverworts in the latter. Simple thallus liverworts are found in both classes, though mostly in the latter.
The last phylum under the non-vascular plant is the phylum Anthocerophyta.
Hello, Nick. Sorry, Nick. Sorry to this. Medyo groggy on my end yung tama ba? Is it just on my end? Medyo hindi ko
Yes, sir.
naririnig.
Yan po, sir.
Yan. Parang hindi siya masyadong audible on my end. Oh. Can you, baka may kailangan i-adjust on your end na sa audio? Okay lang ba? Oo. Like, I can hear you murmuring something, parang gano'n. If okay lang. Ayan. Okay, saglit lang for a while. No?
Ito po, sir. Narinig po ako.
Narinig pa din.
Gamurmur lang yung dating neck. Okay. Sorry to disrupt, guys.
Yes, sir. Maglipat na lang po ako.
Pero naririnig mo kami, like, in full context. Oh, I think sa mic, it has something to do with your microphone. Parang ganun. Kindly, paano ba yan? Oo. Sige lang, may mga problems talaga na ganun. Okay? Maybe you can try using other microphone if you have. Okay lang. Okay.
It's just wait.
So, ayun ha, commercial na lang. No? Thank you very much for the group. No? Talagang grabe yung preparations. No? I really commend. Okay? And advanced ano lang, parang tip, no? If you're going to pitch something, it would be nice if you can like test your video or like my capabilities para smooth lang tayo. Okay? But it happens, no? It really happens. So yeah, we just understand that. Okay? No problem next. Laban lang.
This one po, sir.
Ah, yeah, way better. Yes, yes. Thank you, Nick. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Mag-start na po ako.
Ah, yes, yes.
The last phylum under the non-vascular plants is the phylum Anthocerophyta. They are commonly known as hornworts or horned liverworts. Comprising of about 100 species of simple non-vascular plants, this phylum is the least diverse class among the three. They got their name from the horn-like structure of sporophytes which they produce. Hornworts and liverworts share a similar gametophyte morphology and live in the same habitat. However, hornworts do not possess spores and oil bodies, which are common on liverworts. Hornworts typically have only one chloroplast per cell in their thallus, and similar to the green algae, hornworts' chloroplasts contain pyrenoid where starch storage is concentrated.
Pyrenoids are non-membrane bound organelles that are compartments inside the chloroplast with a high concentration of rubisco, which helps in facilitating a 50-fold increase in carbon dioxide. The high concentration of CO2 is then utilized by the rubisco and is transformed into a high-energy molecule like glucose. Thanks to this, hornworts have better carbon capture than the other non-vascular plants, and they are responsible for 1/3 of global carbon fixation.
Several hornworts perform a close symbiotic relationship with the nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria nostoc. These nostoc live inside the large intracellular spaces of their thallus. Nostoc are known to fix atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be easily utilized by their gametophytes. This nitrogen is then transferred to the sporophyte. Nostoc has an important role in the condition of crop health by providing nitrogen supply in digestible form. Fungal associations of mycorrhizal nature between hornworts and fungi were also reported. However, their relationship is still widely unexplored.
The sporophyte is composed of an elongate cylinder-like capsule that is covered in cuticle. Unlike other bryophytes, it lacks a stalk. Early in development, an intercalary meristem develops. This part continues to develop as long as conditions are ideal, and this facilitates the elongation of the capsule. In the center is the columella, which provides support for the entire structure. And near the spores are pseudoelaters, which resemble the elaters of liverworts but without the spirals. It is hypothesized that this part is used to provide nutrition to the hornwort before capsule dehiscence and will eventually aid in dispersal upon the spore's maturation.
This phylum has two distinct classes, Anthoceratopsida and Leiosporoceratopsida. L. duzai is the only species in the hornwort genus Leiosporocerus. The species is placed in a separate family, order, and class for being genetically and morphologically distinct from all other hornwort lineages. It is distinguished from other hornworts by its small monolith and unornamented spores. When we say monolith by the word itself mono, it means that there is a single narrow line or lisura on the spore. Leiosporoceratopsida have nostoc in longitudinal spaces, while Anthoceratopsida have nostoc scattered in globose colonies. Several studies also encourage that cultivation of Anthocerus species near roots and stems of plants for faster atmospheric nitrogen fixation of these plants. If this method is proven to significantly increase the agricultural crop yield, we will be able to have a more organic harvest on our table.
Now, let's move on to the different characters of mosses based on the three discussed phyla. The first one is Protonema. The protonema is a thread-like chain of cells that forms the earliest stage of development of the gametophyte in the life cycle of mosses. In Bryophyta, they are filamentous, forming many buds, and they may also produce gemmae. In the phylum Marcantiophyta, the protonema is globose or thalloid, forming only one bud, and unlike in the Bryophyta, they do not produce gemmae. In phylum Anthocerophyta, the protonema is globose, forming one bud, and also does not produce gemmae. Next is the gametophyte form, also known as the sexual phase in the life cycle of plants and algae. In the phylum Bryophyta, they have a leafy shoot. On the phylum Marcantiophyta and Anthocerophyta, they have simple thallus and dorsoventral.
So for the special organelles of the phylum Bryophyta, there are simple, small oil bodies or none at all. For Mercantophyta, they have complex oil bodies, while for Anthocerophyta, they have single plastids with pyrenoids. On the fourth character, we have gemma. So to repeat again, gemma is a single cell, or gemmae for plural, or mass of cells or a modified bud of tissue that detaches from the parent and develops into a new individual. This type is a form of asexual reproduction, also referred to as fragmentation. So for phylum Bryophyta, they are common on leaves, stems, rhizoids, or the protonemata. For Mercantophyta, they are common on leaves, while it is absent on Anthocerophyta.
Next, seta refers to the stalk supporting the capsule of plants. Phylum Bryophyta have seta that are photosynthetic, rigid, and remains attached. In some, it emerged from gametophyte early in development. For Mercantophyta, seta have a glassy, translucent appearance. It elongates just prior to spore release. Rigidity and turgidity of the seta can also be observed. However, in the last phylum, seta is absent. The next characteristic is the stomata. Stomata are tiny openings or pores in plant tissues that allow for gas exchange. For Bryophyta, it is only present in sporophyte capsule. For Mercantophyta, it is absent for both sporophyte and gametophyte. Instead, pores are present in some gametophyte thallus. For Antherophyta, it is present in both generations.
For the calyptra, it is a protective structure hood-like covering on the developing capsule. The apex of seta and capsule. It also influences the shape of the capsule. However, for the Marcantiophyta, it ruptures and remains at the base of seta. It also lacks influence on the capsule shape unlike the Bryophyta. Then, for the Anthocerophyta, it is lacking a calyptra. And lastly, the sporangium or capsule is where meiosis occurs to produce haploid spores. The capsule of the Bryophyta is complex with an upper column, theca, and neck. The jacket is multistratus and it also lacks transverse or modular thickenings. While the capsule of the Marcantiophyta is undifferentiated, spherical or elongate, the jacket is uni or multistratus and it is often with transverse or modular thickenings. For the Anthocerophyta, it is undifferentiated, horn-shaped, and then the jacket is multistratus.
Summary.
And to summarize our lesson on non-vascular plants, these plants are the earliest lineage of embryophytes. They lack an established vascular system, true roots, and leaves. They possess apomorphies such as alternation of generations, sporophyte, archegonium, antheridium, and the presence of cuticle that is also observed in higher plant clades.
Phylum Bryophyta is mainly composed of mosses. Phylum Mercantophyta is characterized by a flattened gametophyte, elaters in sporangia, and oil bodies. phylum Anthocerophyta is characterized by an erect aerial sporophyte without gemmae and calyptra, but with pyrenoid.
As we end our discussion of non-vascular plants, you may scan your learning guides that Sir has uploaded in the GitHub if you want to revisit some groups of algae that share a few characteristics with land plants. That is all for our presentation regarding non-vascular plants and the phyla within. Thank you for listening, and now we are open to your question or queries.
Thank you very much for that group one. It's really comprehensive. You're able to cover